Direct News TV. October 16, 2023. Israel-Hamas war live, Biden to visit Israel on Wednesday. Secretary of State Blinken says Biden will emphasize that Israel has the right and duty to defend itself from Hamas. More than 2,800 Palestinians killed by Israeli attacks in Gaza, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reports. Speaking to Iranian state television, Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian says pro-Iranian groups in the region could preemptively act against Israel, even in the coming hours. Hamas's Qassam Brigade says that up to 250 captives are being held in Gaza and that it is prepared to release those with foreign nationalities as soon as circumstances allow. The World Health Organization warns there are only 24 hours of water, electricity and fuel left in the besieged Gaza Strip as Israeli bombardment continues, killing hundreds more. Israel has deployed thousands of troops, tanks, and weaponry along the border fence with Gaza amid expectations it will soon begin a ground invasion. Eurasian bloc urges Israel-Palestinian ceasefire, China state media. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, has urged for the parties concerned in Israel and the Palestinian territories to immediately cease fire and stop violence, Chinese state media reported. The Eurasian Political and Economic Organization said that it was deeply concerned about the increased tensions, calling on all parties to exercise restraint, actively seek dialogue and prevent further deterioration of situation, particularly to protect civilians. The SCO said it also backs UN efforts to cool down the situation as soon as possible through peaceful means and the two-state solution. Israeli forces detain Gaza workers stranded in occupied West Bank. This raid took place in the last couple of hours. Just to give you the latest figures, there have been at least 30 workers from Gaza detained and at least 6 have been wounded. Now, why are these workers actually in the occupied West Bank? On October 7, when Hamas launched its attack on southern Israel, there were about 14,000 workers from Gaza in Israel. They were allowed to go into Israel and were heavily security vetted. It was part of a deal between the Gaza Labor Ministry and Israel to try and get some money into the Gaza Strip. It was a very good deal for Israel. They got very cheap labor and were able to circumvent Israeli labor laws. Now, on October 7, those workers were unceremoniously dumped in the occupied West Bank by their employers. Some of them were interrogated. They were put into various different refugee camps across the occupied West Bank. Halhul is actually a school, and that's where the Israeli forces went in and detained the workers. Other raids are ongoing. In Hebron, 18 members of Hamas have been detained in a raid. This brings the total of Palestinians arrested across the West Bank, including Hamas members, to about 500 since October 7. Biden to visit Jordan after Israel. Following his visit to Israel, Biden will also travel to Jordan to meet King Abdullah as well as the Egyptian president and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, U.S. National Security Advisor John Kirby said. Biden will reiterate that Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination, and he'll discuss again the humanitarian needs of all civilians in Gaza, Kirby said. Blinken has also been traveling around the region over the past week, meeting Israeli and Arab leaders, ostensibly in a bid to find a resolution to the conflict despite overwhelming U.S. public proclamations of support for Israel. Biden-Sisi discussed efforts to ease Gaza humanitarian crisis, White House. Biden has been on the phone with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, discussing the need to preserve stability in the Middle East amid the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The two leaders also discussed ongoing efforts to alleviate the worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, the White House said. Humanitarian aid intended for the more than 2 million Palestinians is waiting to be transported through Egypt, although the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza remains closed, preventing the delivery of aid, including food, water and fuel, after repeated Israeli air attacks on it. Biden visiting Israel to back the country against Hamas. Biden will express Washington's support for Israel on his planned visit on Wednesday, Blinken said, adding that the U.S. president would reaffirm his solidarity with Israel as it prepares for a likely ground offensive against Hamas in Gaza. A meeting in person would allow Biden to privately discuss concerns and possible red lines in the looming ground invasion. But it also poses security risks for the U.S. president as Hamas also launches rocket attacks in the direction of Israel, including the country's main airport, Ben Gurion International. Israeli Defense Minister, "This will be a long war, the price will be high." Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, says the attack on Gaza will be a long war and the price will be high. Speaking after a meeting with Blinken, Gallant described the U.S. as a great ally, which was demonstrated by Washington deploying aircraft carriers to the eastern Mediterranean. Despite warning of the length and cost of the war against Hamas, Gallant said Israel would win. Dozens of Palestinians arrested by Israeli forces in occupied West Bank, report. About 30 Palestinian workers have been arrested by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank, according to Al Jazeera Arabic. The report said that the Palestinians were working at an industrial school in the city of Halhul, north of Hebron in the West Bank. It was not immediately clear why the Palestinians were rounded up. We will keep you updated as soon as we get more information about the incident. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, U.S.-Israel agree plan on aid for Gaza. Antony Blinken has just spoken in West Jerusalem after he attended an hours-long Israeli war cabinet headed by Netanyahu. The main headlines: a deal agreed on between the U.S. and Israel to allow aid into Gaza, and President Biden will be traveling to Israel on Wednesday. Russia reacts to Security Council resolution's rejection, a fiery response from the Russian envoy to the UN as he says that the Security Council is a hostage to Western countries. He adds that the rejection of the draft resolution authored by Russia showed which countries were in favor of a truce in Gaza and the delivery of humanitarian aid, and which were not. UN Security Council rejects Russian resolution calling for ceasefire. As expected, a Russian-drafted Security Council resolution has failed to gather the required minimum of 9 votes in the UN after the US-led opposition towards it for being insufficiently critical of Hamas. The draft called for a humanitarian ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, as well as the release of captives held in Gaza and the safe evacuation of civilians. The U.S. accused Russia of giving cover to Hamas after the group was not mentioned in the resolution. The U.S. is continuing to urge Israel to minimize the risk of civilian casualties, according to an envoy. Netanyahu, Blinken attend war cabinet. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu started off the day by attending the Knesset and went on to have private meetings with Antony Blinken. The U.S. Secretary of State then joined Netanyahu in a meeting of what is known as the War Cabinet, which was established after the war on Gaza began and is a specialized, small circle of people, including the former Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who are highly knowledgeable in terms of defense and war, to discuss what the next steps are. There is also talk of U.S. President Biden visiting Israel. We still do not know whether that is going to happen. But this is at a time when there is so much unpredictability in terms of the opening of the Rafah crossing, as well as about when Israeli forces are going to move into Gaza. Aid trucks for Gaza moving towards Rafah crossing, report. Trucks carrying aid for the Gaza Strip are moving from Egypt's Al Arish in the Sinai Peninsula towards the Rafah crossing, according to Al Jazeera Arabic. The crossing remains shut and negotiations are still underway for the delivery of emergency humanitarian aid to the more than 2 million residents of Gaza. The UN said that Gaza faces a dire humanitarian crisis due to Israel's decision to completely block the transport of food, water, and fuel after the October 7 Hamas attack. Southern Gaza hospital grapples with surge in casualties. Nasser Hospital in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis is grappling with a surge in the number of injured patients as Israeli air raids continue overnight in the Palestinian territory. Al Jazeera's Tariq Abu Azam, who is reporting from outside the medical complex, said the continuing stream of patients coming into the hospital is putting a lot of pressure on the overworked medical team. There's also a shortage of medical supplies, and they are asking for a humanitarian corridor as well as medical help, our correspondent said. He also reported that evacuations from the northern parts of Gaza continue as conditions deteriorate in those areas. Nearly 1,000 Americans and family evacuated from Israel, U.S. The U.S. State Department has announced that nearly 1,000 American citizens and their family members have departed Israel on U.S. government-chartered transport since Friday. The transport has been organized from the port of Haifa, from where the Americans are taken to Cyprus. No evacuation has been organized for the thousands of American citizens in Gaza. My name is Aria. Please like, share, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be the first to be notified whenever we post. You won't regret it.